cheating wife laughed while signing the divorce papers until the judge read the will. "I'll destroy you in court, Gregory. By the time this is over, I'll be rich, free, and you'll be nothing but a memory." Those were the devastating words Callista Cole whispered to her husband before she winked at her divorce attorney and signed the papers with a smile that could cut glass. She had no idea that the man she had humiliated as silent and weak had already orchestrated the most devastating courtroom reversal in divorce history. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about marriage, money, and revenge. Viewers, have you ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal felt like a physical blow to your chest? How would you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Callista's laughter filled the polished office, sharp and self-satisfied. She pressed the pen firmly against the divorce papers, her diamond bracelet glinting under the lamp. Each stroke of her signature felt like a victory. To her, this wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of wealth, freedom, and a life she believed she deserved. She leaned back in her chair, her perfume heavy in the air, and crossed her legs with the poise of someone who had already won. Her lawyer, Mr. Hanley, gathered the papers quietly. He had dealt with divorce before, but something about this moment unsettled him. Callista was not trembling with heartbreak, nor showing the relief of someone escaping a bad union. She was giddy, predatory. Her eyes sparkled, not with tears, but with greed. Still, he said nothing, only tucking the documents neatly into his leather case. Callista stared out of the tall window overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere beyond those towers, Gregory was grieving his father's death. She imagined him in black, his face pale with sorrow. She smiled at the thought of him sitting helpless, unaware of the trap she had already set. "By the time the estate is read," she whispered, her voice laced with pride, "I'll be sitting on half of it." The truth was, she had planned this moment the day she heard the news of his father's illness. While Gregory sat by hospital bedsides, Callista had been at another office, her lawyer's. She wanted the process in motion before the funeral. In her mind, the timing was perfect. Divorce now, inheritance later. A clean strike that would make her rich without the burden of marriage. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message lit up the screen. "Did you sign? Can't wait for our new life together." It was from Victor, the man she had hidden in shadows for months. A man who promised her excitement, whispered to her about freedom, and told her Gregory's silence meant weakness. She smiled at the message, typed back quickly, "It's done, jackpot secured." The church air was heavy with incense and sorrow. Gregory stood at the front, his mother's fragile hand tucked in his own, eyes fixed on the polished casket that held his father. The man who had built a dynasty was gone, and the chapel walls seemed to echo with the weight of that loss. Rows of mourners filled the pews, their whispers subdued, their eyes wet with grief. Gregory's black suit fit him with solemn precision. He was still, composed, but the grief pressed down on him like stone. Around him, familiar faces bowed their heads, business associates, relatives, old friends, each of them knowing the empire would soon pass into his hands. Among the mourners, Callista stood in her sleek black dress, her veil covering just enough to cast a mysterious shadow over her expression. She did not look broken. She did not look shaken. She was radiant in the way that drew eyes, her posture straight, her steps measured. She held a small black purse against her ribs, and inside that purse was the envelope that would sever her marriage in the most public of ways. The service drew to a close. Hymns faded, and the priest's voice fell silent. Pallbearers lifted the casket, moving it slowly down the aisle. Gregory followed behind, his shoulders squared, his grief cloaked in silence. Callista's heels clicked against the stone floor as she moved closer, her pulse steady. To the world, she looked like a devoted wife standing beside her husband in his darkest moment. Only she knew the true purpose of her presence. At the graveyard, the casket was lowered, prayers whispered, tears shed. Gregory stood still, his eyes fixed on the soil that would soon cover the man who had shaped him. The moment was sacred, raw. But to Callista, It was opportunity. As the priest closed his book and mourners began to murmur condolences, she reached into her purse and drew out the envelope. She stepped forward. Her perfume drifted in the air, cutting through the scent of lilies and damp earth. With practiced elegance, she pressed the envelope against Gregory's chest. Her voice, low but firm, cut into the silence. "Gregory, the marriage is over. Sign the divorce papers." Gasps broke the quiet. Heads turned. An elderly aunt clutched her rosary, whispering a prayer under her breath. A cousin shook his head in disbelief. Even the priest's lips parted slightly in shock. Serving divorce papers at a father's funeral was a cruelty no one present could have imagined. Gregory looked down at the envelope, then slowly lifted his eyes to Callista. His gaze did not burn, nor did it soften. It was unreadable, like marble, cold and timeless. Without a word, he took the papers, folded them once, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. Then he turned back to the casket, his head lowering again as if she had never spoken. The murmurs swelled around them, but Gregory's silence swallowed them whole. Callista's lips curved faintly behind her veil, misreading his composure as defeat. To her, his silence meant she had won. To him, it was the beginning of her downfall. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp in Gregory's study. Heavy curtains shut out the night, and silence wrapped around him like armor. On the desk before him lay the envelope Callista had pressed to his chest at the graveyard. He unfolded the divorce papers with slow precision, his eyes tracing her signature as if it were carved in stone. The ink carried her laughter, her arrogance, her betrayal. Beside the papers sat a thick folder, evidence collected over months. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his face carved in shadow, and opened the folder. Photographs slipped out, each one a frozen betrayal. Callista stepping into a hotel lobby with another man. Callista's laughter caught through the lens of a long-range camera. Callista's hand entwined with someone else's. Gregory flipped through them with steady fingers, his expression unreadable. His mind drifted back to that night 7 months earlier. Callista had gone upstairs to change for a dinner party, leaving her phone on the living room table. Gregory had been on his way to the kitchen when the screen lit up. At first, he thought it was an emergency, an instinct that made him pick it up. But what he saw rooted him to the floor. A series of messages scrolled across the screen, bright against the dark. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You make me feel alive. He'll never know." Gregory stood in silence, his heart pounding but his face calm. He didn't shout. He didn't storm upstairs. He didn't accuse. He set the phone back on the table, exactly where she had left it, and walked into the kitchen as though nothing had happened. When Callista came down moments later, smiling and adjusting her earrings, she found him pouring wine with steady hands. She never noticed the shift in his gaze, the steel that had slipped behind his eyes. She kissed him and said, "Don't wait up before leaving." Gregory took his phone and contacted a private investigator, a man his father had once trusted in business disputes, the kind of man who left no trails and asked no questions. "Follow her," Gregory had said simply. "I need to know everything." And so, for 5 months, the investigator shadowed Callista's every move. Hotels, restaurants, phone records, all catalogued in silence. The folder before Gregory now was the sum of that vigilance. He studied it with the same patience his father had taught him in business. Never react, only prepare. The clock ticked past midnight. Gregory folded the photographs back into the file and placed the divorce papers neatly beside them. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Son, wolves smile before they bite. Protect the legacy. Don't let them feed." Gregory's jaw tightened. His hand lingered on the papers for a moment. Callista thought she was the one ending the marriage, the one controlling the board. But Gregory knew better. Every move she had made was already accounted for, every betrayal documented, every signature her undoing. He switched off the lamp. In the darkness, his resolve was absolute. The game had begun long before she ever realized it, and now it was his turn to play. The morning sun cut through the blinds of the law office, drawing sharp lines across the polished conference table. Gregory sat at the head of it, his posture calm, his suit immaculate, a man composed on the surface but holding the weight of a storm within. In front of him lay 3 sets of documents spread carefully across the table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. First, the divorce papers Callista had pressed into his chest at the graveyard. Her signature was bold, almost flamboyant, as if she believed she had already won. Gregory's hand rested on them briefly before he slid them aside. Next came the thick folder, opened to reveal the photographs, phone logs, and written reports from the private investigator. Each page was an indictment, each picture a betrayal. Callista smiling in another man's car, Callista leaving hotels late at night, Callista's texts captured and recorded in print. Gregory let the evidence breathe in the open air of the office, his face calm, his movements deliberate. Finally, he placed the 3rd document on the table. The prenuptial agreement signed 3 years ago. The paper was aged at the corners, but the signatures were clear, hers sitting confidently beneath his. Gregory traced the words with his eyes, the clause that nullified all marital claims in the event of infidelity. She had laughed when she signed it, brushing it off as a mere formality. But here, in the clean light of day, it was no longer a formality. It was a weapon. Across from him, his lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, adjusted his glasses and studied the documents. He had represented Gregory's family for decades and knew the elder Mr. Cole's reputation for foresight. He looked at the evidence, then at Gregory, his expression both serious and impressed. "She has no idea what's coming," Whitaker said finally, his voice measured. "With this," he tapped the prenup, then gestured to the evidence, "and the timing of those papers, she's trapped. She thinks she's divorcing you for half of your inheritance. In reality, she's walking straight into her own ruin." Gregory leaned back, his hands folded loosely in front of him. His silence was not hesitation, it was control. "File everything," he said simply. "When the time comes, I want the court to see it all." Whitaker nodded, gathering the documents carefully. "You've played this well, Gregory. She won't see it until it's too late. But when the judge reads that prenup aloud, and this evidence is submitted, her case collapses instantly." Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice remained calm. "She served me divorce papers at my father's funeral. That was her move. This is mine." The lawyer closed the folder with finality. Outside, the hum of the city carried on as if nothing monumental was happening inside that room. But for Gregory, the strategy was already set. The empire his father had built would remain untouchable, and the woman who mocked him as nothing more than an ATM was about to discover what it meant to underestimate his silence. In Victor's apartment, Callista lounged against silk cushions, her heels dangling off the edge of the sofa. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. Gregory's silence after the funeral hadn't shaken her. It had emboldened her. She convinced herself it was the silence of defeat. Victor emerged from the bedroom in a half-buttoned shirt, a grin tugging at his lips. "So," he said, tossing himself down beside her, "how long until the court makes it official?" "Not long," Callista answered, swirling the wine in her glass. "The filings are complete. All that's left is the judgment. Once the estate is counted, half will be mine. And when it's mine, it's ours." She smiled at him over the rim of her glass, a smile filled with hunger rather than affection. Victor smirked, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "I still can't believe Gregory didn't fight. A man like him, just folding like paper." "He's always been like that," Callista said flatly. "Too quiet, too cautious. He thinks silence makes him strong, but it only makes him pathetic. He let me walk all over him for years. This is the final walk." She leaned forward, pulling a notepad from her purse. She had scribbled lists across the pages: houses in Bel Air, a penthouse in New York, resorts in Europe. Her handwriting stretched across the lines like claims on territory. She pressed the pen into the page, circling names of cars and jewelry brands. "First thing," she said, tapping the list. We're moving out of this apartment. I'll have a mansion, pool, staff, chandeliers. Gregory's silence will have paid for it. Victor laughed, taking the notepad from her hand and tossing it onto the table. And I'll finally have the car I deserve. A man like me shouldn't be driving second-hand imports. Callista's phone buzzed on the sofa. She glanced at it, her pulse quickening. It was a calendar reminder for the court date flashing across the screen. She picked it up, her reflection catching in the black glass. 2 weeks, she said softly, almost to herself. 2 weeks, and the world changes. Victor kissed her neck. And what about Gregory? Callista laughed, setting the phone down. What about him? He'll walk into that courtroom thinking he still has power. But when the judge signs the papers, he'll watch everything slip from his hands into mine. He'll finally understand what it means to be worthless. Victor raised his glass. To the end of Gregory. To the beginning of us, Callista replied, clinking her glass against his. They drank, their laughter spilling into the night, blind to the truth. That Gregory's silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation, and every moment they spent celebrating brought them closer to ruin. 2 weeks later, the courthouse doors swung open, and Callista walked in with the poise of a woman convinced the world already belonged to her. A tailored red dress hugged her figure, pearls at her neck gleaming under the lights. Reporters called her name, snapping photos as she glided across the marble floor, her smile faint but deliberate. To them, she was the picture of confidence. To herself, she was already rich. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Lawyers shuffled papers, reporters whispered, and curious strangers packed the benches, drawn by the whispers of scandal surrounding the case. Callista took her seat at the petitioner's table, crossing her legs smoothly, her hand resting on a leather handbag. Her eyes found Gregory as he entered quietly, dressed in a charcoal suit, his face composed, his gaze unreadable. She smirked. His silence had not broken since the funeral. To her, it was proof of weakness. He had accepted defeat, and this was only a formality. The judge entered, the courtroom rose, and proceedings began. The clerk read the case title, Callista Cole versus Gregory Cole. A divorce petition seeking division of marital property, including claims on Gregory's inheritance. The words rang like music in Callista's ears. Her lawyer rose, presenting her case with crisp certainty. He spoke of her role as a wife, the life she had grown accustomed to, the fortune Gregory was due to receive from his late father. Each sentence was designed to frame her demand as rightful, lawful, inevitable. Callista listened, her smile deepening, her gaze flickering toward Gregory as though daring him to object. Gregory sat still, hands folded, not a flicker of reaction crossing his face. His lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, adjusted his tie and rose with calm precision. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady but carrying weight. Before we address the petitioner's demands, we must first submit into record the last will and testament of the late Mr. Charles Cole. A hush fell across the courtroom. The judge extended his hand, the document was passed forward, and silence stretched as he scanned its pages. The only sounds were the soft rustle of paper and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Finally, the judge lifted his head. His voice was clear, deliberate. The will of Charles Cole states, if my son Gregory Cole is divorced at the time of probate, his spouse shall receive nothing from my estate. The words landed like a thunderclap. A ripple of gasps swept through the room. Journalists scrambled for notes. The gallery erupted in whispers. Callista's smile faltered, the color draining from her face. She turned sharply toward her lawyer, who was already fumbling through papers with a pale expression. Her throat tightened. For the first time, doubt flickered behind her eyes. She looked at Gregory, expecting a reaction, a plea, even anger. Instead, his calm gaze met hers with the same silence she had mocked. Only now did she realize it was not silence of weakness. It was silence of certainty. The courtroom was still buzzing from the shock of the will's clause when Gregory's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, calmly adjusted his spectacles, and rose again. His voice carried with the same steady rhythm that had unnerved Callista since the proceedings began. "Your Honor," he said, holding up another folder. "While the will makes clear that the petitioner is entitled to nothing from Mr. Cole's inheritance, we must also address the matter of marital assets. For that, we submit into record a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 3 years ago." A hush spread through the gallery. Callista's heart thumped against her ribs. Her mind flashed back to a dimly lit cafe, Gregory sliding papers across the table, her laughter ringing out as she dismissed them as a pointless formality. She remembered signing without reading the fine print, sipping her wine, thinking she was indulging her husband's paranoia. Now the document lay in the judge's hands. The judge examined the agreement, his expression firm. "This prenuptial agreement states that in the event of infidelity, the guilty party forfeits all rights to marital assets." His voice was even, but to Callista it sounded like a verdict already being read. Her lawyer sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor." Whitaker cut him off smoothly. "We anticipated denial, which is why we submit into evidence the findings of a licensed private investigator, hired months ago by Mr. Cole, documenting the petitioner's affair." The clerk stepped forward, distributing copies of photographs, phone records, and written reports. Screens lit up at the front of the courtroom, displaying image after image. There was Callista stepping into a hotel lobby with Victor, her hand resting on his arm. There was Callista in the passenger seat of his car, leaning across to kiss him. There were the text messages printed in black and white. "I can't wait for this divorce to go through. Soon we'll be free. Soon we'll have everything." The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scratch of pens from reporters scribbling furiously. Callista's lawyer pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. Callista herself sat frozen, her lips parted, her breath shallow. The emerald dress she had chosen to look powerful suddenly felt like chains tightening around her body. She turned toward Gregory, searching for even a flicker of mercy. He sat unmoving, his gaze calm, almost detached, as though he were simply watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. His silence cut deeper than any accusation could. The judge cleared his throat. "This court recognizes the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Combined with the evidence presented, the petitioner's claims to marital property are void. She is entitled to nothing." Callista's eyes stung. She gripped the edge of the table, her manicured nails digging into the wood. Around her, the murmurs grew into a wave of judgment. Victor's name was whispered among the crowd, his face splashed across the photographs now seared into the public record. The empire she had counted on had crumbled in seconds, not from Gregory's anger, but from his patience. The courtroom was still buzzing from the shock of the will's clause when Gregory's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, calmly adjusted his spectacles and rose again. His voice carried with the same steady rhythm that had unnerved Callista since the proceedings began. "Your Honor," he said, holding up another folder, "while the will makes clear that the petitioner is entitled to nothing from Mr. Cole's inheritance, we must also address the matter of marital assets. For that, we submit into record a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 3 years ago." A hush spread through the gallery. Callista's heart thumped against her ribs. Her mind flashed back to a dimly lit cafe, Gregory sliding papers across the table, her laughter ringing out as she dismissed them as a pointless formality. She remembered signing without reading the fine print, sipping her wine, thinking she was indulging her husband's paranoia. Now the document lay in the judge's hands. The judge examined the agreement, his expression firm. "This prenuptial agreement states that in the event of infidelity, the guilty party forfeits all rights to marital assets." His voice was even, but to Callista it sounded like a verdict already being read. Her lawyer sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor." Whitaker cut him off smoothly. "We anticipated denial, which is why we submit into evidence the findings of a licensed private investigator, hired months ago by Mr. Cole, documenting the petitioner's affair." The clerk stepped forward, distributing copies of photographs, phone records, and written reports. Screens lit up at the front of the courtroom, displaying image after image. There was Callista stepping into a hotel lobby with Victor, her hand resting on his arm. There was Callista in the passenger seat of his car, leaning across to kiss him. There were the text messages printed in black and white. "I can't wait for this divorce to go through. Soon we'll be free. Soon we'll have everything." The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scratch of pens from reporters scribbling furiously. Callista's lawyer pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. Callista herself sat frozen, her lips parted, her breath shallow. The emerald dress she had chosen to look powerful suddenly felt like chains tightening around her body. She turned toward Gregory, searching for even a flicker of mercy. He sat unmoving, his gaze calm, almost detached, as though he were simply watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. His silence cut deeper than any accusation could. The judge cleared his throat. "This court recognizes the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Combined with the evidence presented, the petitioner's claims to marital property are void. She is entitled to nothing." Callista's eyes stung. She gripped the edge of the table, her manicured nails digging into the wood. Around her, the murmurs grew into a wave of judgment. Victor's name was whispered among the crowd, his face splashed across the photographs now seared into the public record. The empire she had counted on had crumbled in seconds, not from Gregory's anger, but from his patience. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one you trust most. Gregory turned silence into his sharpest weapon, and Callista's greed destroyed her own future. Viewers, if you were in Gregory's shoes, would you have walked away in silence? Or made her pay even more? Drop your answers in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.